I do think that we should do maybe a more sophisticated form of accounting as well, which is that the U.S. public also is extremely generous in its own way on a lot of international issues, but that will only add up to a few more billions of dollars, not hundreds of billions of dollars. And I'm not convinced that the United States needs to spend a ton more money overseas, but my book makes an argument for how we spend it and what we do with it there. And one indication that more of it should be civilianized or on the civilian side is that in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, we spent large amounts of money through the military on civilian needs. So we've acknowledged that this is an important way to create progress, and there's not a general in the United States military that doesn't want the civilian side to be more effective. General Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, basically said, you better put a little bit more money over here, or you better buy me a lot more bullets. And he wasn't looking for more bullets when he said that. So there's a natural balancing, and we're way out of. I'd say we're way off balance right now.
Two unrelated questions, I suppose. You mentioned the U.S. has troops in 120 countries. How many should we really be in? And then separately, are there any organizations outside government-based efforts that are effectively promoting the types of initiatives that you advocate in the book? And if so, who are they?
Yeah, so there are literally hundreds of groups that are doing wonderful work. I'd be just curious, could I maybe get you to raise your hands? How many people make a contribution to some group that does some international work, like the Red Cross, Save the Children, Mercy Corps, World Vision? So pretty good representation of people. So I hope that answers that question. Many of them are doing wonderful work. And one of the things that they're trying to do that I'm encouraged by, they almost all did humanitarian work. But the problem with doing humanitarian-only work is that sometimes in these crises, you get to save the same person's life 10 years in a row, because you haven't really changed the on-the-ground circumstances that they're living in. And the humanitarians have grown frustrated with that. They want to have progress as well. I had many of my best employees were people who had started as humanitarians, and they kind of got tired of saving lives without addressing the fundamental political changes that needed to take place. So there are many, many of these groups that are doing this work. They're doing it very well, and they are evolving into being more savvy about the politics of these places, which I think they need as well. And the first part of the question. Yeah, well,
the first question was, we were a military presence in 120 countries.
Yes, yes.
Should it be in all those places?
I think we're overstretched, and I think because everyone has to be negotiated, there have to be agreements with each of these countries. There have to be special interpretations when an American soldier does something that didn't work. Maybe went out for a drink, had too many, and so there are always complications. And now with the kind of mobility that we have today, the kind of communications that we have today, the idea of outposts and bases and sort of the physical, and plus protecting these now from terrorist attacks gets tougher and tougher and tougher. So I like the international view that we take, but I don't know that it has to be anchored by bases in each of these places. And it's also a huge, huge expense. It now costs us to have an American soldier in Afghanistan. It costs about $1 million a year per soldier. So that's a lot of money. I can just tell you, when I was working in Kenya, that so Kenya had gone through Kenya's an important country in the United States. It's sort of the anchor of East Africa. It's where all the international organizations are. It's really, and it's a progressive country. A lot of things have gone right, other than its national government, which has been a bit of a disaster for some time. And they were coming up to face an election for the national presidential election. And the prior election, there had been almost over 1,000 people had been killed, and over 500,000 people have been chased from their homes in politically organized violence, which the organizers had not been able to shut down. They got it going and then they couldn't shut it down. And in the past, they'd always been able to do that. So we were asked, could we go and help them? They've done all kinds of reforms, a new constitution, they were going to elect local people, a new police chief, a Supreme Court that would have real influence. All kinds of things were taking place. But still, when we met with a group of about a dozen of the leading U.S. aid recipients in the most heavily affected violent area of the country, the Rift Valley area of Kenya, we asked, so what worries you most? And the first person said, violence in this coming election. And we then went around the room and everybody said, violence in this coming. They all said that was it, consensus agreement. Are you doing everything that you would like to be doing right now to help counter that? No. What might you do? The first person to speak was a man who ran a horticulture program. He said, you know, I don't know what we might do because I only have 400 farmers in my horticulture program. And I said to him, well, I'm from the United States, and I can assure you that if I was running for governor and I had 400 farmers, I could be elected in any state in the country except for Texas. And they all laughed, even though you would think that was a fairly sort of abstract notion. And they all laughed and they got it. And the next person to speak was a woman who ran the AIDS program. And she said, well, we visit 120,000 households a week. So maybe we could be of some help. Well, that's beginning to sound like a political machine. And so they all got together, along with the people that we had already identified, the Episcopal bishop, the Catholic bishop, the Pepsi-Cola bottler, kind of an odd coalition. But they got together and they created a peace group that then went to political rallies. Whenever hate speech was used, they would boo. They developed a relationship with the police. So the police now had a demand side as well as a supply side, so that the public knew what it wanted and the police could get the early warning from them. Now, we could have put Americans in there, but we asked them, what would be the fastest way to get your asset into play? And they basically said, if we could hire, we all have 24/7 jobs. If we could hire 1 or 2 more staff people for the next 3 months up to the election, and maybe 3 months after the election, we can then use this resource we have, this organizing base that we have, and we can go out and make a difference in the communities. And we said, well, how much is it going to cost? About $1,000 a person. So 200 people were hired almost immediately. We didn't have to interview them. We didn't have to go through any part of the U.S. government process to do it. They made the selection. They could put their people into play. For that same amount of money, less than $600,000, I could have put 2 Americans in there for 9 months. Now, unless it's Clark Kent and Lois Lane, they're not going to have that kind of influence. So,
we're nearing the end of our time frame, but we do have a couple more questions. What use can be made of social media to engage the public in ways that would promote the purposes you've been discussing?
Right, it's a really good question, and it really fascinates me. I've been a fan of traditional media since I got started in Bosnia, really, and using television in particular, because television is so persuasive. And in a country where nobody trusts each other, seeing is believing. And so if people see things on TV, they sometimes think they're true. We did some really spectacular things with television in Nigeria and Indonesia, and less spectacular in Bosnia, but effective. And I try to describe those stories in the book. The social media piece is so new, and I'm a great believer in it, but like almost any new media, it is being sorted out. we're figuring out how to, and what I liken it to is, for some of you in the room will remember the transition from radio to television. All the people who were on television when we first, some of us first started watching television, were radio performers. And so they get in front of a camera and then they drop their voices an octave. As if that was all you needed to make television. And of course, it was a totally different medium. It was okay to have a guy with a great voice, but what was really important was what are you doing with the visuals, the pictures, and everything else. So I feel the same way about the social media. We actually tried to use it in particular in Syria. There were some people, and I disagree with this, who called Syria the first social media war. It's a pretty traditional war. I don't think it has. But the opposition was extremely clever in their use of social media at the front end. And they really got under the dictator's skin, which by and large is a good thing in my mind. And so they could get the message out very quickly, very effectively, and you could mobilize literally thousands of people. The difficulty in a place like Syria is that those who were being mobilized had never had any prior political experience, because the Assad regime was so vicious that anybody who had any political promise had been killed, exiled, imprisoned, or encouraged to take on a different career. So there was no base to operate, and these were mainly students and whatnot. But they really got it, and we tried to do things with it, like advertising on Facebook to drive people to Syrian opposition websites. But what was curious at that time was Facebook was actually quite nervous. They came to see me. And what they didn't want to lose was their market position, as opposed to being a tool for something that could really matter. And they're getting a bit of a spanking here in the United States right now on this kind of issue as well.
Okay. Why is Costa Rica so different from the rest of Central America?
Well, I haven't been in Costa Rica, so I can only tell you what I hear about it, but it was an honest democracy with the people having an influence in what was going on in their country for decades. So it's, if you those of you who like to sort of combine scholarship and practice, there was a Nobel Prize winner economist named Amartya Sen, and one of his key theses is that there will never be a famine in a democracy. Why? Because the government depends on the people for its support, so it's not going to be paternalistic and say everything is fine, the big ruler is taking care of everything, don't worry, there's not a problem. It's like we better get on the problem and get with it or we're out of office. So democracy does matter. It's a heck of a good thing.
This question here can be answered by anyone who wants to buy your book. So you don't answer it now. How long did it take for you to write your book? So we'll ask anyone who's interested in that to come see you as they line up to buy your book. But, one final question then. About a year ago, a licensed speaker said that the State Department is understaffed because replacements have not been found for retirements and resignations. Is that still the case in 2018? And in what area is the shortage most serious? And that's our final question.
Great. Well, thank you all for these wonderful questions, and I hope I answered a few of them. I don't want to be a venture capitalist when it comes to answering questions. I'd like to get a higher hit rate. The State Department is suffering through a departure of many, many, many talented, mostly senior people, and which is not a good thing. And many of them are leaving because of what they feel the U.S. policies are and the way the institution is being run. So, on the other hand, I don't feel that the State Department has been as well run as it could have been through the years. In many parts of the U.S. government today, but this is especially true in the foreign policy space, there's a high percentage of people, I don't know what it is right now, but it used to be around 65% of the people were within 5 years of retirement when I was in one part of the State Department. That's the result of freezes, hiring freezes, and other sort of artificial changes that have been made when there are budget constraints and whatnot. And when you make those kinds of arbitrary management decisions, you end up with these gaps of talent, that you might not have enough people between 35 and 55 or 35 and 50. I believe that's all much more addressable, and I also think that the retention rates that we have in organizations, the way you measure a lot of organizations, a good school is, are the teachers, do the teachers stay there for a while? Has the leadership been there for a while? That's not that different in these places. But I think the recruiting needs to be much more aggressive. I know that whenever we talk to our students, and Kit and I run these 2 fellowship programs in Princeton, there are serious numbers of students who want to serve in the U.S. government. And it's now we've got a couple artificial things happening that you should all be aware of. One is security clearances. We have a brutal, awful, expensive, and counterproductive system of security clearances. So if you want to go to the State Department and you've traveled, it's hard to get a security clearance because you've been to foreign countries and whatnot, and that's tougher to confirm that you're not a security clearance. It's crazy. It's absolutely the opposite of what it should be. So what ends up happening, rather than hiring a young person who's right out of school and might have a difficult security clearance, they'll hire somebody who has had a prior security clearance, maybe a retiree or somebody else. Well, that's not necessarily the way to fuel a healthy organization. My belief in a healthy organization is that 33% of it should be inside of less than 5 years, 33% should be 5 to 15 years, and 33% should be 15 to whatever number of years. That's not a golden rule, but that's an indication of a balanced organization that has up-and-coming talent and has people who have some continuity and has some wiser people who've been around and seen mistakes made over the years. So there are a lot of ways of doing it, but that's not the way we're doing it. So sometimes some of these complaints, and it's a valid complaint about the chasing out of senior talent in the State Department right now. But at the same time, we need to look at the fundamentals, and are we doing those as well as we could as well.
Great. Thank you.